The Girl Who Knew the Pharaoh's Secret. By Alex Wynne Ashwood. Moonlight drifted down the avenue of sphinxes and settled on the pylons of Amun's temple like fine dust, turning the carved reliefs to a pale, patient shimmer. Thebes, that city of breath and stone, slept with the steadiness of the river. Within the temple enclosure, the night wind moved the tall flags a little, and the painted gods kept their watch with eyes that had seen more secrets than any human could carry. Kiya moved among them with a reed brush tucked behind her ear the way a soldier tucks a dagger, quick-footed and barefoot so that even her shadow made no noise. An apprentice scribe was supposed to dream of neat columns and even margins, not prowl the archive after dark. But curiosity is an older god than most and accepts worship at inconvenient hours. Kiya told herself this was the last time. One more look at a mislabeled bundle, one more careful bit of tidying, one more tiny theft of time from sleep, and slipped through the narrow door of the records room. Heat met her with the smell of dried river, papyrus and glue and oil, and the dust that collects in places where words are stored. She sheltered a small flame in her hand and coaxed it to life in the wick of her travel lamp, careful to keep the light thin. The shelves rose around her like stands of reeds, each scroll tied with cords and tagged in a hand that had been old before she was born. Here were the annals of harvests, the temple's letters to the palace, the lists of jars holding other lists, gifts made and received, favors tallied and forgotten. Here, too, was a humming she felt rather than heard, the soft, threatening restlessness of secrets. She had just set the lamp at the edge of a table when the murmur of voices slid under the door like a draught. Not the sleepy mumble of novices, but low and deliberate speech, close enough for the wood to pick out syllables. Kiya's body knew to still itself, only her eyes moved, locating the lamp and cupping it, weighing whether to extinguish it or let it burn small. Before the inspections, said one voice, clipped and dry. And the scroll? The second voice tilted upward with worry. Kiya knew that first speaker without seeing him. Menkheper, high priest of Amun, was not a man the temple walls misremembered. His words fit their spaces too exactly. Tonight, he said. When the temple sleeps. If anyone asks in the morning, it was always where it should be. Footsteps, then a lingered silence, as if the corridor itself had to agree. Kiya stood stock-still until the hush had settled into its old shape. Only then did she breathe out, cover the lamp again with her hand, and move. If Menkheper was removing a scroll ahead of inspection, it would not be one tied in red cord and stamped with a seal. It would be an ordinary-looking thing pretending to be about irrigation ditches or goat births. She drifted the lamp along the shelves until the light struck a small bundle tucked behind a ledger of oil jars. The twine was the unremarkable kind tied by novices. The papyrus, when she cradled it, had the heavy softness of something that had been scraped and overwritten more than once. Lazy scribes did not scrape, secrets did. She loosened the cord, unrolled the first few turns, and tilted the papyrus to catch the light so the erased strokes rose like fish beneath water. The words came up faintly, stubbornly, a palimpsest of conflicting intentions. Beneath the feet of Amun, a chamber whose name must not be spoken, lineage recorded in the old form, a royal name altered by a second hand. Her breath made a small sound she hoped only she could hear. She had copied annals of kings since she could hold a brush straight. She knew what it meant to cut a name out of stone. The gods were involved whenever a cartouche was destroyed. Erasure was not housekeeping. It was violence. The latch jostled and Kiya flinched, guilty reflex flashing through her like a swallowed spark. A head appeared around the door, a bronze helmet under one arm, a face lit by the clumsy halo of a torch. Retold had a way of arriving as if he'd meant to be somewhere else entirely and had stumbled into her path by accident. It was the most suspicious innocence she had ever seen. He blinked at the lamp, at the shelves, at the reed brush behind her ear, and at the scroll in her hand. The torch dipped. Somewhere in the shadows a god with the head of a falcon watched them both without blinking. Kiya did not bother to pretend the scroll was a jar label. She rolled it, slid it under the sash at her waist so it pressed cool against her stomach, and lifted her chin. The look she gave him had carried her past more than one door she had no right to pass. Rehotep, who learned quickly, said nothing at all. The torch guttered as if scandalized. He moved it farther from the brittle papyrus. He had the easy strength of a man raised in the sun and trained to stand where others did not want to stand. And yet he could make himself small when the world needed him to, smaller even than his humor. There were words he could have spoken, warnings about Menkheper, guesses about punishments, foolish reassurances, but none of them would have changed what Kiya already meant to do. He seemed to know it. The look he settled on her was a mixture of annoyance and admiration. He tipped his head toward the hallway as if to say that whatever came next would be safer undertaken somewhere that did not burn for a living. In the courtyard, Thebes breathed again. The moon had climbed higher. The stone lions along the balustrade wore light across their backs as if it were a thin golden net. Kiya stood and felt the shape of the scroll at her waist and tried to think like a person not crowded by words. Menkheper's warning had been for someone else, but its shadow had found her. She could douse the lamp, return the bundle, sleep, and pretend in the morning she had never learned the shape of the Fraser chamber whose name must not be spoken. She could also hold her breath until the Nile flowed backward. She kept the scroll. The next day stretched like linen pulled tight on a frame. The copyist's room hummed with flies and repetition. Kiya's hand moved and did not betray her. She wrote the same character 30 times and then 30 more, fed sand to wet ink, counted jars, labeled baskets. The ordinary discipline of the work steadied her heartbeat and made her thoughts sharper. At midday she bribed the oldest novice with a date and borrowed a corner of the storeroom to unroll the scroll in private. Even in better light the text sulked and refused to explain itself in a single voice. She coaxed it with patience and the stubborn affection a scribe reserves for difficult grammar. The instructions were not obvious directions. They were the sort of hints a cautious man leaves himself so that another cautious man will fail to follow. A carved lotus notched instead of rounded. A seam that looks like a crack but breathes. Steps counted with a verb no longer in use. Under the feet not meaning beneath the floor, but below the literal feet of the statue of Amun when it is carried, no, when it walks in procession. The chamber had been made to be forgotten and unfound, and whoever preserved this text wanted the next reader to be clever enough to deserve it. Kiya felt her mouth curve in spite of the heat. She recognized the handwriting of a mind that loved riddles as much as she did. By sunset the temple air thickened with purpose. Menkheper passed through rooms like a knife laid on a table, followed by a wake of smaller men trying to become his edgies. Locks were tested. Doors that never minded being closed heard what it is to be barred. Someone polished a bronze latch that had not shone in years. The smell of incense thickened to the sweetness of overripe fruit. In the scribe's hall the high priest delivered his announcement in a voice you could balance bowls on. A document had strayed and would please return itself to his hand, at once and with humility. Kiya bent over her work and let the back of her neck prickle without moving a muscle. After dark the temple's grandeur shrank to pools of lamplight and the thump of the occasional tail of a courtyard cat. Kiya waited at the edge of the colonnade until Rehotep's shadow separated itself from the darker ones and came to stand beside her. He did not ask if she intended to look for the chamber. He had the face of a man making a bad plan sit up straight and tuck in its shirt. The simplest door into the sanctuary was watched by 2 alert men and the sort of silence that meant any wrong sound would matter. The more interesting door was the one no one ever admits exists, a low-service way that swallowed ash and swept out reed husks and the men who carried them. Kiya had learned a temple has as many hidden passages as a narrative. She and Rehotep found the one that breathed. Inside the wall, the air was cooler. Their lamp was a bite of sun held in a spoon, its light licked the edges of rough stone. Dust rose, unwilling to be disturbed. Kiya's shoulder brushed plaster and came away with a ghost of white. She counted steps the way she counted strokes of a sign, not aloud, but with a tension so exact it made her scalp tingle. 7 strides to the first bend, 3 to the seam that only pretended to be a crack, then the carved lotus with a bud too pointed to be unintentional. Her fingers found the notch and pressed until her thumb ached. Something shifted. Stone spoke to stone in a long, soft groan, like an old animal remembering how to lie down. They entered a room that had been emptied of everything except meaning. No painted gods, no gilded friezes, no reassuring hieroglyphs promising eternity. There were only walls washed pale and then left to fade, and at the far end a stone couch notched for a body that planned to be still. A sarcophagus lid stood upright against the wall where it had been propped by men who did not want to take the time to lower it. The carved face had been damaged with a fury that did not fade. The nose was a hollow, the mouth a collection of wounds. Below the broken features, where a cartouche should nestle with its tidy ring of protection, there was a raw rectangle instead. The name had been chiseled out so energetically that the stone had the look of a scab. Kiya brought the lamp closer and held it as if warming a sleeping thing. Erasure has its own handwriting. She could read violence in the slope of the gouges, and urgency in the way the chisel had skittered at the edges. Someone had tried to destroy even the memory of the name. Someone else, less strong or more humane, had failed to obliterate all of it. A stroke here, the tail of a bird there, the faint suggestion of a loaf sign caught in a corner. The old form of the word for king lingered like the smell of smoke. A second hand had come later to overcut and disguise. The palimpsest of hate lay thick on the stone. She steadied her breath until the little movement of air stopped tugging at the lamp. The scroll's cramped script and the half-ghost of glyphs on the lid began to agree in her head. A chamber whose name must not be spoken, built beneath the gods' walking feet. An erased royal identity. A record of lineage written, amended, scraped. Kiya thought of processions, of what the statue of Amun concealed inside its gilded shrine, of the knots a priest ties in a cord when he wants the gods to attend and the people to forget. Rehotep kept watch at the seam of the door, an outline bent into readiness. He had said little since they entered, and his stillness made its own argument about the seriousness of the room. His presence steadied Kiya in a different way than ritual ever did. He belonged to the practical world: body, bronze, breath, the weight of a hand, and his closeness was a reassurance against the bright, dizzy edge of discovery. She felt, for one ridiculous instant, an urge to tell him about the silliest mistakes she had made in the copyist's room that week, how an ink drop had landed on the wrong line and she had turned it into a beetle with the flourish of a brush. Humor in a place like this felt like hiding a flower in a soldier's helmet. Beyond the wall, footsteps came and went in tired patterns. Then a set of steps approached with the steadiness of decision. Kiya damped the lamp with the crook of her finger until it became only a pearl, then slid it behind a protrusion of stone and cupped the last of its light with her palm. The seam brightened. It wasn't only feet this time, it was voices and the scrape of metal and the hush men teach themselves when they fear being noticed by a god. The door shifted. Menkheper entered first. His outline might as well have been carved on the back of Kiya's eyelids by now. She would know that posture in a